Have you ever heard someone say that if an older man goes too long without ejaculating, he's putting his health at risk? It's the kind of advice that spreads quickly between friends, shows up in online forums, and leaves a lot of men genuinely wondering whether they're unknowingly harming themselves. The truth, as is so often the case in medicine and biology, is far more nuanced than that one-liner suggests. Some men worry because they no longer feel the same drive they had in their 40s or 50s. Others are widowed, divorced, or single, dealing with erectile dysfunction or simply not seeking sex as often as they once did. And then there are those who've been told they should force themselves to ejaculate regularly because they've heard it protects the prostate or boosts testosterone. If you've ever wrestled with those questions, you are far from alone. But before you start changing your habits based on rumors, alarming headlines, or something a friend read on the internet, it's critically important to understand what your body is actually doing at a biological level. My name is Dr. William Lee. For over 2 decades, I've been at the intersection of science, medicine, and human health, studying how the body heals itself, how our lifestyle choices shape our biology from the inside out, and how evidence-based thinking can transform the way we approach aging. I've had conversations with thousands of men who carry these exact questions with them, often silently, sometimes for years. Today, I want to share what science truly tells us, where the evidence is strong, where it's still evolving, and, most importantly, what actually deserves your attention when it comes to your long-term health. Before we dive in, if you find this kind of rigorous, science-backed men's health information useful, I'd encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And I'm genuinely curious, drop a comment below. What's the biggest myth you've ever encountered about men's health after 60? Let's begin with the most fundamental misunderstanding. A lot of people carry around this mental image of the male body as something like a pressure tank. Semen builds up, and if it's not released regularly, it backs up and causes harm. That's an intuitive picture, but it simply doesn't match how human physiology actually operates. Your reproductive system functions far more like a highly adaptive, self-regulating biological system than a vessel that overflows. Sperm are continuously produced in the testicles, but they don't linger there indefinitely waiting to be released. When they aren't ejaculated, the body activates natural processes to break them down and recycle their molecular components. This is a well-documented biological mechanism that's been part of human physiology throughout our evolutionary history. In other words, not ejaculating for several weeks or even longer does not automatically create a dangerous internal buildup. The body manages this process efficiently, quietly, and without any conscious input required from you. This surprises many men when I explain it to them. They come into clinical conversations deeply concerned that they've somehow damaged their prostate or compromised their health simply by going through a period of sexual inactivity. The biological reality is almost always reassuring. Your body has built-in regulatory systems, and those systems are doing exactly what they were designed to do. Now, that doesn't mean ejaculation has no connection to health whatsoever. Some research, including work referenced by institutions like Harvard Medical School and the American Urological Association, suggests that men who ejaculate regularly over many years may have a modestly lower statistical association with certain prostate concerns later in life. But here's where I want to be precise. Because precision matters enormously in science, these studies show an association. They do not establish that ejaculation itself is the mechanism driving that outcome. Men who are sexually active tend to share other characteristics. They often exercise more consistently, sleep better, manage chronic stress more effectively, and carry fewer untreated medical conditions. All of these factors independently influence long-term prostate and cardiovascular health. When you look carefully at the data, it becomes much harder to isolate ejaculation frequency as an independent causal variable. The story is more complex than any single headline can capture. What I can tell you with confidence is this: if ejaculation occurs naturally, through partnered sexual activity, or through masturbation, and it's comfortable, appropriate to your circumstances, and consistent with your personal values, there is generally no medical rationale for avoiding it. For many men, it can be a normal, healthy part of their overall well-being. But what I find far more clinically significant is what happens next in this conversation. In my experience, many older men become so focused on the question of ejaculation frequency that they overlook something far more consequential to their long-term health. They spend weeks tracking a number, counting days since their last sexual experience, while the body is quietly sending more important signals about blood flow, hormonal balance, medication effects, and cardiovascular function. They're watching the wrong dashboard. Think of it this way. Imagine your car's warning light comes on. Instead of looking under the hood, you spend all your energy polishing the exterior. The car looks fine from the outside, but the engine is telling you something needs attention. Sexual health works in a similar way. Changes in ejaculation frequency are often not the root issue. They're downstream signals pointing towards something deeper that deserves a proper evaluation. And one of those deeper issues is so prevalent in men over 60 that many don't recognize it's happening until it has already begun affecting far more than their intimate life. That issue is vascular health, the health of your blood vessels and your circulatory system. Most men associate circulation problems exclusively with heart disease or high blood pressure, but healthy circulation plays a critical role across many systems of the body: sexual function, urinary health, wound healing, cognitive clarity, and sustained energy. Here's a physiological detail that I find particularly illuminating. The blood vessels that supply the penis are significantly smaller in diameter than the coronary arteries that feed the heart. Because those vessels are smaller, they can show early signs of vascular compromise years, sometimes a decade or more, before any cardiac symptoms become apparent. I've spoken with many men who assumed a meaningful change in their sexual function was simply an inevitable consequence of getting older. And while aging does bring genuine biological shifts, it is almost never the entire explanation. Conditions like type 2 diabetes, elevated LDL cholesterol, chronic smoking, excess visceral body fat, and poorly controlled blood pressure can all gradually reduce blood flow through a process of progressive arterial narrowing, often without producing obvious symptoms in the early stages. Picture watering a garden through a hose that's slowly accumulating mineral deposits on its interior walls. The water doesn't stop abruptly. The flow diminishes gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you notice the garden isn't thriving the way it used to. Your blood vessels can behave in exactly that way. That's precisely why paying careful attention to your vascular health is clinically far more valuable than worrying about achieving a specific ejaculation frequency each month. The encouraging news, and there is genuinely encouraging news here, is that many of the same lifestyle strategies that protect your cardiovascular system also actively support healthy sexual function. Regular aerobic exercise, resistance training, diets rich in colorful vegetables and healthy unsaturated fats, optimal blood sugar management, adequate and consistent sleep. These interventions work synergistically to preserve vascular flexibility and tissue health throughout the body. This is an area where your daily choices carry measurable biological impact. Now let's talk about testosterone, because it's another topic that generates enormous confusion and no shortage of myths. Some men believe that refraining from ejaculation causes testosterone to accumulate at higher and higher levels. Others hold the opposite view, that frequent ejaculation depletes testosterone, leaving them feeling fatigued and diminished. Neither of these ideas holds up well against the scientific evidence. Testosterone levels naturally oscillate throughout the day, typically peaking in the morning and declining through the afternoon. They also follow a broader trajectory of gradual decline with advancing age, though the rate of this decline varies considerably from man to man. What the research consistently shows is that factors like chronic sleep deprivation, excess body fat, particularly visceral adiposity, prolonged psychological stress, heavy alcohol consumption, certain medications, and untreated medical conditions tend to have a far more substantial influence on circulating testosterone than ejaculation frequency ever could. If you're experiencing persistent fatigue, noticeable loss of muscle mass, a significant reduction in libido, mood changes that feel out of character, or difficulty with concentration, those are symptoms worth bringing to your physician. A thorough evaluation, including appropriate lab work and a review of your medical history, can clarify whether low testosterone or another underlying condition is contributing to what you're experiencing. That conversation is far more actionable than trying to optimize a number on a calendar. What I strongly caution against is restructuring your life around some arbitrarily prescribed ejaculation schedule because a social media account or a wellness blog claimed there's a universal ideal frequency for all men. There is no such universal formula. Some healthy older men maintain an active and satisfying sex life. Others are in excellent health and ejaculate infrequently or rarely. Both realities can represent completely normal variation when they align with the individual's physiology, comfort level, and personal circumstances. There's another dimension of this conversation that I want to address directly because it doesn't come up often enough. Psychological stress and anxiety can produce more measurable disruption to sexual health than the mere absence of ejaculation. When a man becomes preoccupied with whether he's doing something physiologically wrong, when he's lying awake calculating days and second-guessing his biology, his nervous system registers that as a chronic threat. Sustained psychological stress activates hormonal pathways that can suppress libido, impair the vascular response necessary for erections, degrade sleep quality, and strain intimate relationships. In other words, the anxiety generated by believing the myth can actively create the very problems the myth warned about. That's a pattern I've observed repeatedly, and it's worth naming clearly. Rather than organizing your attention around fear-based counting, I encourage a different framework entirely. Ask yourself how you actually feel. Are you moving your body consistently? Are you sleeping well and waking feeling rested? Do you have good management of any chronic health conditions? Are you maintaining regular preventive checkups with your doctor? Are your relationships with others and with yourself a source of connection rather than isolation? These questions reveal far more about your trajectory of health than any ejaculation log ever could. There's one more piece of this conversation that I consider essential, and it's something many men never hear clearly articulated in a clinical setting. It concerns not ejaculation itself, but when a change in sexual function should be interpreted as a biological signal calling for medical evaluation rather than a simple concession to aging. The question I want every older man to sit with, honestly, is this: has something changed? And if so, how did it change? A gradual shift in sexual function that unfolds across many years can reflect the natural arc of biological aging. The body changes, that is real, and pretending otherwise serves no one. But a sudden change, a significant change, or a change accompanied by other physical symptoms is a different matter entirely. That kind of change deserves medical attention, not passive acceptance. If you've noticed persistent erectile dysfunction that didn't exist before, pain associated with ejaculation, blood in your semen, discomfort in the pelvic region, increasing difficulty with urination, dramatic changes in urinary flow or frequency, or a sharp and sustained loss of sexual interest, please don't chalk those up to just getting older. These can be early indicators of conditions involving the prostate, the hormonal system, the vascular network, nerve function, or medication side effects. And many of these conditions, when identified early, are highly treatable. One of the most consistent clinical observations I've made over the years is that men wait too long. They sit with symptoms for months, sometimes years, before mentioning them to a physician, often because they feel embarrassed or because they've normalized the change by attributing it to age. Then they discover that effective interventions were available the whole time had they simply started the conversation sooner. Here's what I want you to take away from that. Physicians who work in men's health have these conversations every single day. There is nothing you could describe about your sexual health that would be surprising or embarrassing in a clinical context. The far greater clinical concern is the patient who silently tolerates a problem that was entirely addressable. Your willingness to speak up, to simply say something has changed and I want to understand what's happening, can make an enormous difference in the outcome. And this connects to a broader principle that underlies all of the science I've spent my career studying. The body is not a passive vessel that simply decays with time. It is an active, adaptive biological system that is constantly sending information, constantly responding to the environment you create for it. The question is whether you're paying attention to that information and whether you're giving your body the conditions it needs to maintain and restore its own function. Blood vessel health, hormonal balance, immune function, metabolic regulation. These aren't separate systems. They are deeply interconnected, and the choices you make in your daily life reach into all of them simultaneously. When men come to me focused only on the narrow question of ejaculation frequency, I always gently redirect the conversation toward the fuller picture. What are you eating? How are you sleeping? What does your movement look like? How is your stress being managed? What chronic conditions are present, and how well are they controlled? Those answers consistently tell a more complete biological story than frequency alone ever could. And they point toward interventions that actually move the needle, that improve vascular health, support hormonal balance, reduce systemic inflammation, and enhance the quality of life in measurable, meaningful ways. I also want to say something about the role of connection, relational, emotional, and social, in men's health after 60. This is an area that doesn't get nearly enough scientific attention, but the data are increasingly clear. Social isolation and emotional disconnection carry measurable biological consequences. They affect stress hormone levels, inflammatory markers, immune response, and cardiovascular function. Men who maintain meaningful relationships and remain emotionally engaged tend to carry biological profiles that support better health outcomes across multiple dimensions. So while no one is suggesting that a fulfilling sex life is the sole determinant of healthy aging, the broader landscape of intimacy, connection, and emotional engagement genuinely matters, not as a luxury, but as a biological input that your body integrates alongside sleep, nutrition, and movement. When men ask me to boil all of this down into a simple number, how many times per week should I ejaculate? I understand the impulse. We want clear answers. We want a prescription we can follow. But the honest scientific answer is that there is no validated universal target that applies to all men in all circumstances. What I can offer instead is a set of far more meaningful questions to orient your attention. Is your vascular health being proactively monitored? Are your blood pressure, blood sugar, and lipid levels well managed? Are you getting adequate restorative sleep? Are you physically active in a way that challenges both your cardiovascular system and your musculature? Are you eating in a way that reduces inflammation and supports cellular health? Are you having honest, open conversations with your physician about changes you observe in your body? If you can answer yes to those questions, you are doing something far more powerful for your long-term health than any ejaculation schedule could achieve. And if you've noticed a change in your sexual health that has been quietly troubling you, if you've been meaning to bring something up with your doctor but keep putting it off, I want to encourage you to make that appointment. Not next month. This week. Because early attention is almost always better than delayed response, and because the conversation you've been hesitant to start may open a door to solutions you didn't know were available to you. The science of how the human body ages is one of the most dynamic and evolving fields in medicine. We are learning, year by year, how much more influence we have over our biological trajectory than previous generations understood. The choices you make now, in your 60s, 70s, and beyond, continue to matter in measurable, meaningful ways. That's not wishful thinking. That's biology. Take care of your vascular health. Protect your sleep. Move your body consistently and purposefully. Eat foods that your biology recognizes and can use. Manage the conditions that are within your control. Have the conversations you've been avoiding. And approach your health not with fear, but with the curiosity and commitment that the science clearly rewards. Your body is paying attention. The question is whether you are too, if this conversation has been useful to you. I'd encourage you to share it with someone who might benefit. A friend, a brother, a father, or someone you know who's been carrying these questions quietly. And if there are specific topics in men's health over 60 that you'd like me to address in future videos, leave them in the comments below. The more specific your questions, the more useful I can be. Thank you for watching and for taking your health seriously enough to ask the hard questions.